I'm going to go ahead with the meeting beginning ritual.
起立，面向佛堂，参加三鞠躬、一鞠躬、再鞠躬、三鞠躬，参加高一点传世一鞠躬，开班一鞠躬，请坐下。Please be seated.
And as usual, welcome to all of you. It's a joy to see everybody online with us this morning. And it is, of course, the March 4th installment of our online Tao study group. Today, although the title seems rather benign, I'm actually going to discuss a rather difficult topic with you. As you all know, I was not here last week. That was because our one of our dogs got very sick, and we wound up having to put him down on Monday, which was not fun. But going through those things always causes me not only to rely on the Tao teachings as best I understand them, but to think about them in terms of the events that transpire. And I mention with some frequency the fact that our attachments and desires bring us suffering because it's the truth. They do. But this was a very intimate opportunity to examine some of those statements up close and personal again, which has not happened for me for some time. And some of these events, the death of a close relative, the death of a pet, are emotionally traumatic or involving, at a pretty deep level. I have to confess, I don't form the same emotional bonds with the pets that my family appears to have. I don't form those attachments to a lot of people that deeply. It's something I actually rather try to avoid most of the time. But that's kind of my own, I guess, psychological problem, if you will. But I still, from time to time, wind up in the middle of these situations. And in this particular case, because of what had to be done, obviously my family relies on me to take care of the details, if you will, because for them going through that is virtually more than they can bear. Now, before we get into all of that, in terms of the things that we choose to keep in our lives, I find very frequently that there are kind of three distinct schools of thought, if you will, and I run into these very frequently. And I kind of want to talk about this just for a moment because it has a bearing on how we apply the teachings on attachments and desires. There's the philosophy of no rules, if you will, which is the thought that says that everything's included in the Tao, therefore everything is okay. You hear this primarily from folks who are involved in what I refer to as the New Age church of what's happening now, where there's an awful lot of conversation about what the Tao means, but not very much authentic understanding. This is the school of thought that says there is no right or wrong, no good or evil, no rules, that if it's within my nature to do or be a certain way, that was the way the Tao intended me to be, ergo I don't have to do anything. That sort of thing. That sort of thinking is horribly erroneous and causes for an awful lot of lives to either stagnate or go horribly off the rails because of the impression that one can do anything without consequence, repercussion, or karma. I shouldn't have to say, and so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, that kind of thinking leads only to trouble and hardship and grief. It is also the school of thought that leads to an overabundance of attachments and desires as a result of the failure to modify one's thinking and life to come into alignment with the Tao teachings. There is the other extreme, what I call the philosophy of extreme moderation or exclusion, that says that all desires, attachments, and even the self are to be annihilated, eliminated, done away with. That sort of thinking comes to us in our understanding in the West very frequently from our interpretation of the classical Buddhist teachings. I do not know enough about how the Buddhist teachings are implemented to tell you for sure if the absolute elimination of desires and attachments is one of the goals or not. If it is, I am of the firmly held belief that while that may be something to aspire to, I think it's a practical impossibility. I think human nature precludes the annihilation of all attachments and desires simply because of the way we're psychologically wired. And so, I pin that school of thought at one of the other extremes because I think it represents, once again, an extreme desire to accomplish something, and I don't believe that it can be done. And then there's what I refer to as the more moderate path, which is the understanding that our attachments and desires are going to bring us suffering, and so we should choose carefully and wisely what it is we choose to keep. That's the school of thought that I have always expressed. It's what I believe in the deepest cockerels of my heart. And the longer I live, the more convinced I am that this is both philosophically and intellectually correct. That a certain amount of attachments and desires in our lives are right and appropriate. But I also understand that every single one of them at some point is going to cause us suffering. Why is that happens? Well, leading up to the ultimate point here, let's talk about for a moment the things we choose to keep. Those things create in us emotional attachments that bind us to other people, places, or things. If that doesn't occur when we become attached to something or desirous of something, then there's really no point in maintaining that attachment. Hopefully, those attachments and the fulfillment of some of those moderate desires bring us joy and happiness in our lives, right? I mean, the goal, hopefully, for all of us, is that we work real hard to accomplish the things that we want to accomplish, with the goal being a happy and fulfilled secular and spiritual path in this existence at this time. If there's some other goal or motivation driving the attachments and desires, we may be the victims of our own misplaced thinking. And so if what it is that we've chosen to hang on to isn't bringing us some kind of joy or happiness, perhaps we have to reevaluate what it is we've chosen to keep. But even if our thinking is completely right, ultimately those attachments and desires are going to bring us suffering. They are. Okay. Once again, I've been reminded that sometimes the things we choose to keep cause us to confront our core choices and beliefs and values because of the events that surround those attachments and desires. That sometimes the things we choose to keep put us in situations where the suffering is incurred, but as a result of the suffering, we receive an opportunity for spiritual refinement and growth, for some additional maturing, for the opportunity, as I'm expressing here, to re-examine our thoughts and beliefs and values, and hopefully to gain some wisdom and some clarity along the road of our spiritual path. Very often, those opportunities for growth come along with a pretty significant amount of pain, you know. So, what all happened? Well, we had up until Monday 2 dogs, Chauncey and Ash. Ash is still with us. Chauncey and Ash are both shelter dogs. We've never acquired pets from breeders or, puppy mills or anything. We've always gone to the Humane Society. My wife and I believe that there are plenty of animals on the face of this planet that are in disadvantaged positions that, we don't need to contribute to that by encouraging wanton breeding and uncontrolled population growth amongst dogs and cats and what have you. And so we always go to the Humane Society here, and the whole family goes on the trip, and it's really almost miraculous the way it works. The dog that's supposed to come home with us always finds us. We always find it, and it always works out, and has for a number of occasions now. Chauncey's been with us for almost 14 years. That's a remarkably long life for a dog. That's pushing 100 in dog years, roughly, about 7 years in dog years for every year in people years, as I understand it. And I've told my children on more than one occasion that the final accomplishment of enlightenment is, in fact, being a fat, happy house dog in a loving home. Our dogs wanted for nothing. Chauncey was about 100 pounds worth of somebody's brand of mutt. His breeding was completely unimportant to us, but he was a pretty good sized, average dog. So he had his own big fluffy bed in the corner of the family room, and they got fed twice a day, all the water they wanted, plenty of mom approved treats. I discovered over the years that there are some things you can't actually feed a dog in the way of people food because even though it's really good and beneficial for us, it upsets their tummy something fierce. And so, there was an educational process there as well. And for 14 years, that was the story of Chauncey's life. He was comfortable. He never spent an appreciable amount of time outside if he didn't want to be there. He was never too cold, never too hot. He was treated when he was sick. He was loved when he was healthy. He was taken care of, and knew that there were people in this world that cared about him and that loved him. Even I succumbed to the occasional desire to pet the dog, although for me to do that means I spend 2 days sneezing because I'm all kinds of allergic to them. But yes, even I succumbed to the desire to pet and snuggle the dogs. and I believe with all of my heart that they have achieved nirvana. They had the perfect existence. If you're a dog, I think, nobody hurt them, nobody abused them, everybody cared for them. It was I guess as close to perfect if you're a dog as you could get. But about a month ago, Chauncey started to become ill, very, very ill. He'd been obviously exhibiting the symptoms of old age for some time. His hips were arthritic, and he was starting to lose some muscle mass, and he wasn't anywhere near as quick as he used to be. He had cataracts and all the things that happen to us as we get older. And in point of fact, Chauncey and I had a lot of the same general kinds of difficulties, because I'm not exactly a spring chicken myself anymore. So I could kind of identify with some of the things that were going on with him. But over the last couple of weeks, he was quite ill, and it was apparent that he was in renal shutdown, and really beginning to have problems. And so it became time for Paige and I once again to have the discussion about what needed to happen for him. I want you to understand that discussion took 4 days. And it took that long because above and beyond all things, we wanted to be sure that we weren't just ending our suffering, but that we were, making the right decision as it pertained to Chauncey. We didn't want to, put him down if there were some hope that he might actually recover and that what was wrong with him might be treatable. And so we talked to the vet and we talked to each other, and at the end of all the discussions, we finally determined that the only thing that could be done was to put him to sleep. And by the time that discussion occurred, by the time I spoke to Derek last weekend, it was apparent that Chauncey was having a lot of pain and a lot of trouble. He'd lost his back legs. He couldn't get around. He lost control of other functions and was really, really having a lot of difficulty. And so on Monday we took him to the vet, and I went with him, and we had him put to sleep. Every now and again, somebody asks me, particularly because of my martial practices, if the Tao teachings include killing, if that's part of the Tao teachings. Sometimes that question is coming from the school of thought of no rules, where everything's okay. Sometimes it's a legitimate question about how you handle things like defending your home or getting rid of termites, wasps, other undesirable insects and stuff, or in this case, a pet or a relative that is in really bad shape. And the question is always, does the Tao include the taking of life? Yes, the Tao includes the taking of life. The Tao includes a number of things that we find distasteful and unpleasant emotionally sometimes, but that absolutely are part of living. And in the case of the dog, there was a responsibility that was adopted the second we adopted Chauncey, and that was to look after him and care for him, and ultimately, if necessary, put him down when that became necessary, because it was most likely that he would not live as long as we would. and we agreed to take care of him. And sometimes taking care of him means that you have to end the suffering and not just preserve a life that doesn't have any dignity or quality left to it. There is a way that those things happen that brings the process into alignment with the Tao teachings. And it's important to understand why and how that works. In particular, because one day it's going to be my wife and children making that decision for me in all likelihood, and I'd really like for them to get this one right. At least I hope they do. It is a process where, although it's emotionally difficult, it is not emotionally attached. It is a solemn and serious decision, but not one that's driven by some kind of extreme desire or any kind of a violent wish or any kind of negative emotionalism. It is a matter of what has to happen. In nature, we see it in terms of predation. And, what happens there simply is that something that was born to eat other animals kills and eats other animals. There's no reveling in the killing. There's no glorification. There's no joy taken, if you will. There's not a huge fanfare discussion or anything else. It's handled as humanely and as possible, but it happens just the same. If we put it into somewhat easier to understand terms, if your house were infested with termites, or if a huge nest of wasps or hornet had taken up residence in your attic, it would be unconscionable for most of us, I would hope, to move out of our homes so that we don't have to disrupt the lives of the bugs. It's not appropriate for us to allow the termites to eat our houses or the wasps to drive us out of our house simply because it is their nature to build their dwelling places where we happen to be living. Now, under those circumstances, they've got to be removed. They got to go, right? However, when they build their homes somewhere where we're not, that is, when they're not in the process of destroying our house, there's absolutely no point to go hunt them down and kill them. There is still a vital and essential respect for all living things there. And it's not a process by which one throws a gee, we're going to kill the termites party. It simply is a process by which, you call the bug guy, preserve your investment, or get a potentially very dangerous infestation of bugs out of your home. It's that kind of thinking. Obviously, we were all emotionally attached to Chauncey, and that created more of a situation than it would have been had we been eradicating ants, termites, or wasps. But therein is the ultimate point. Because of the attachments, because of the emotional bond to our pet, there was suffering at the end. And the suffering was a bummer. But the process had to unfold because of the responsibility we accepted when we got the dog. That is the right and appropriate thinking. And it doesn't make any difference ultimately if it's the dog or if it's me. It's the same process, and the same suffering will occur. It's for that reason that I admonish all of you to be careful and wise about your attachments and your desires, because one of these days, something's going to happen by choice or by accident where those attachments and desires will bring suffering. We went into that with our eyes open. It was okay when it happened. It's okay now. Sometimes when it happens by accident and you're completely unprepared for it, it's a lot more traumatic and a lot less fun. One of the other questions I get, and this one from my own children, actually, is, are the other animals sentient? Are they aware of their own existence? Are they aware of their spiritual self, if there is one? That's a remarkably deep question, and not one that I'm sure I'm fully qualified to answer. I personally believe the dogs are sentient. I'm sure they're self-aware. I know they are. They feel joy. They feel pain. They feel sickness. For some reason, they remember us every time we come into the house. I don't know what happened millennia and millennia ago when that first feral canine wandered into that cave where that cave dweller was maybe cooking a piece of mammoth or something, and decided that what the caveman was cooking smelled better than the caveman. But from the moment where that first canine-human relationship occurred to now, there's been very nearly a symbiosis between the two species. And there's an awareness there in the animals that is remarkably human. And I think it developed over those millennia because it helped the dogs and the humans both to survive. But I'm absolutely positive that they're aware of their existence, that they're aware of themselves. So, will I see Chauncey again someday after I pass? I don't know. Maybe. Maybe not. That's the part I'm ill-equipped to answer. Is the dog a spiritual being? I think yes. I think all animals are possessed of a part of the very essence of the Tao, whether they're aware of it or not. And so perhaps one day, I'll see him again. Maybe. Either way, it's going to be interesting. The other question is the attachment appropriate? I thought about that long and hard for a few days after we had to have Chance put to sleep. This is the second time I've had to do this. The first time was my wife's first dog. And it wasn't any fun there either. And we still have Ash, which means that, a few years from now, I'm going to have to go through this again. But I've got to tell you, for the joy and happiness that those two animals have brought to my family, I think the attachment was both appropriate and well worth keeping, even though I knew one day that this was going to happen. I think the attachment I have to my wife and children is appropriate. I think the attachments I have to my friends and my students and the people in my life that I allow myself to get that close to are appropriate. Even though if something happened to any of them, I'd be pretty much distraught for a while. I can also say that cultivating the Tao teachings and understanding that dying is part of living helps to mitigate some of the suffering that occurs as a result of one of the attachments or desires coming to an end. Just something to think about. So, to kind of wrap this one up for you, we're all destined to do some suffering now and then. That's just part of living. Even if we had no attachments and desires, there still would be a certain measure of suffering to life. That's just part of living. It's just part of the way it is. And so, I guess if we have to suffer, we ought to try and make wise choices where and when we can. But the truth of the matter is that most of our suffering is the direct result of our own choices. The things we do, the things we hang on to, the things we get attached to, the choices we make, all are either the source of most of our joy or most of our suffering. And along the way, even if we do the best we can to be wise and intelligent, at every juncture, we're still going to make mistakes, we're still going to be wrong, and we're still going to suffer. Okay? Ultimately, it is our desires and our attachments that are the major cause of most all of our suffering. It is the stuff, the people, the things, the dogs, all of the myriad things that we choose to keep in our lives, the things that we want to maintain a connection to, that ultimately will cause us the most grief. And so maybe we should exercise some wisdom, some caution, some thought, maybe a lot of thought to what it is we will choose to become attached to. Thank you all awful much for letting me share with you today. And I sure hope something in that experience was beneficial to you.
Bill, thank you. And let me convey from the group, I'm sure from all of us, condolences to you and your family for losing your pet. And lastly, I want to share with everyone a perspective on suffering from the Tao philosophy. I want to draw everyone's attention to the word compassion. And in Buddhism, you very quickly learn about suffering, the causes of suffering, and the ways to cease suffering. What about in the Tao? I think we can gain some insights from the word compassion. The word compassion comes in two parts. The com part, the first part of it, C-O-M, that means together. So we see that in words like common, commonwealth, in words like commiserate, companion, company. These are all words having to do with togetherness. So keep in mind, calm means togetherness. Passion, what about that? Well, there's a Rod Stewart song, Passion, but that's actually not the meaning of passion in this case. Passion, in compassion, comes from an ancient usage of the word, usage from antiquity. Passion means suffering. A lot of you remember that years ago there was a movie produced by Mel Gibson called The Passion of Christ. If you are familiar with Catholicism and Christianity, you know the Passion of Christ actually means the suffering of Christ. So passion, in this case, in this context, is not the common usage of love, being passionate, etc. Passion in this case means suffering. So compassion, what does that mean? Togetherness and suffering. It means what you feel for someone or a living thing or creature when you are feeling the suffering that they are experiencing along with them.
That's where compassion is in your heart. So I think the word itself makes sense and gives us a clue as to the nature of suffering and the nature of this virtue that we call compassion. In this world of ours, there's suffering everywhere. There's suffering in our own lives. There's suffering in our pets, suffering in other people who are less fortunate. If in those cases we can expand our minds, our hearts, to experience even just a little bit the suffering that they are experiencing, then you would naturally feel empathy for them and you will be compelled to do something about it. That's compassion. And it comes from this shared suffering that we all have the capacity to experience. So the goal in the Tao, so it's a little bit different than the goal that we're taught in studies about Buddhism, in Buddhist philosophy, that the goal of life is to practice the Eightfold Path, to cease suffering, etc. Okay, that's well and good. In the Tao, we recognize that suffering becomes the origin or the source of opportunities for us to experience this beautiful compassion that we have for ourselves, our loved ones, our friends, complete strangers, other people we may never have the chance to meet, and creatures who share this earth with us.
Let's go ahead and do the meeting ending ritual, everybody. 起立，面向佛堂，持架三鞠躬，一鞠躬，再鞠躬，三鞠躬，持架各位顶传十一鞠躬，斜翻一鞠躬。Well done, everybody. Thank you so much.